Hi, everyone. Welcome to the myHRgenius, the myHR webinar. My name is Kevin Mosher. I'm an attorney at Thomsco, Cousins & Irons, and I'm excited to present this month's webinar to you on telecommuting. Interesting topic. We haven't dealt with this on the myHR webinar in the past, and we're pretty excited to be dealing with it today. So there are a number of issues, obviously, that we're going to talk about, anywhere from safety to like overtime issues, and also cultural issues, communication issues, that sort of thing. So pretty excited about talking about it. For those of you who are not familiar with the webinars, welcome. Happy to have you. I guess I'll show you. This is me. So there you go. If you don't know me or haven't listened to me in the past, that's me. It's a smiley me. I was told to smile for the camera. So, and then if you are unfamiliar with the myHRgenius program, I know a lot of you are members that are listening today, but it's a subscription-based legal service program. It includes lots and lots of legal advice on day-to-day issues, unlimited amount of legal advice, and you don't have to worry about getting legal lawyer type of bills. So this is a pretty cool program. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to us or call me, or check our website at myHRgenius.co. These are the other services that we offer in the program as well. So let's go here. Okay. If you have questions, so these are the topics that we're going to cover today. If you have questions on the program today, you are welcome to write them down in the Q&A. Should be a little Q&A box that you can see. Happy to have those questions. Can't guarantee that I'm going to get to all of them and look at them, but you are welcome to write them down. And if for whatever reason we don't cover the question, if I don't see it or whatever, I'll probably follow up with you and respond to you or give you a call or something like that. But we can talk about it. I want to make sure that whatever questions you have get addressed by this thing. So anyway, topics that we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk about working from home, telecommuting, telecommuting, remote workplace. This is obviously something that is very different than what we had addressed, and what we knew 10, 15 years ago. When I became a lawyer long ago, working from home was a very rare thing. Even, and I became a lawyer, around the turn of the century. So, it's obviously with technology, with the needs of the workplace. I think, the combination of technology, smaller workforce, needs for to get workers, to develop those workers, and to get them, to be working for your company. I don't know why this keeps sliding on me. But sorry if it's. Hopefully the audience view doesn't have this slide keep sliding here. But the needs for the workers, obviously, just a lot of things have come together to make it such that we now are, in a situation where there's just a lot of telecommuting businesses and options. For those of you that are unfamiliar with my podcast series, we have a new podcast series that, and I'm sorry if that keeps sliding on people. Hopefully it's just me that it's sliding on. But we have a new podcast series. And the last topic that we did on it like a week or two ago was on telecommuting. And the guest there is in the construction, the specialty construction type of business. But it was really interesting to hear how a construction type of business, a national construction business, is just now rolling out a telecommuting option for certain levels, like for certain exempt employees. And again, construction, just a little surprising that construction would be one of those businesses that would be coming to this telecommuting. I mean, I think most every business. I will say our firm just recently rolled out a policy in the last month or two. Rolled out a policy regarding telecommuting as well. I think service industry. Salespeople obviously have been remote workers in telecommuting for a long, long time, especially if they're covering a geographic territory. Service industry, obviously you've got IT people that can do computer programming and software engineering and all that sort of thing anywhere in the world. So there's just a lot of service type of companies. But I think as we go further, I think more and more of your typical blue collar type of worker companies, if you haven't started to explore the idea, and again, in a tight labor market, I think it's almost necessary that most every company does it to some extent. They're just, probably most every business could have some sort of employee that you might bend over backward because of their skill set or whatever it is that you say, hey, let's do a telecommuting arrangement. Could also be because of a disability. The person might have some sort of disability, physical, mental limitation that telecommuting, working from home, is an option. So anyway, we're going to talk about this stuff. But the podcast was really interesting. So if you have 10, 12, I think it was about it might have been 15 minutes, a 15-minute podcast. So if you have 15 minutes. And you'd like to listen to me speak more, because who doesn't, then in that situation, there is a cool podcast exactly on this issue. So we're going to talk about working from home. We're going to talk about we've already talked a little bit about the history. We're going to talk about a legal discussion on this, and then we'll talk about strategies just kind of generally in. So you could see just from the demographic, the demographic breakdown on just population shifting in the workplace that, you can see right here, 3.7 million Americans are working from home. That's not a huge number, when we're looking at the total population, but it's certainly a significantly larger number than it was in 2015 or 2005. I mean, as you can see, 115% increase. And I don't think that increase is going to change. I mean, I think it's in line with what we see with the contingent workforce, where we've got employees that are working from home. They're contingent workers. The rise of independent contractors, obviously, just as our economy changes to more and more greater on service and greater on the implementation use of technology and working in that sector, we are just going to, I think, see more and more people that are working from home. Personally, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, but it seems to me that the more and more we are using devices, I have a 15-year-old, and I can tell you from straight-up experience that my 15-year-old's use of a device, and if he is indicative of Generation Z, oh my gosh, the staring at devices and the non-interaction with physical human beings in front of you, it just I can't believe how little he, on some summer days, that he interacts with actual live human beings outside of his family in person. And I think that in that social anxiety, I just kind of wonder if people aren't going to want more and more to work from home, to, just like how people like to watch movies now on Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is, versus going to a movie. I mean, there are options now to do all this stuff from home where you don't have to be out there and around people, and I just wonder if that's not increasing. Anyway, there's my armchair psychologist. I think I might have taken one class of psychology in undergrad, and that therefore informs my great opinion on this. But take it for what it's worth. I just don't think this is changing. I think if a construction company is moving to an area where they're looking at this from a need perspective, I think I think everybody is going to. Obviously not. It's not going to be for every job. Retailers, people still need to work. People still need to wait on tables. They need to serve people in person, obviously. But I think there are an increasing number of jobs that work from home, remote workers are relevant. So yes, in-office days are becoming in-the-office days are becoming more popular. Along so we've got this work from home trend. We also obviously are seeing a shift in what the office itself looks like. I mean, more and more businesses that I talk to are implementing this hoteling type of office arrangement. And hoteling is just, it's another, where you just check out rooms or conference rooms, and you don't have a standard desk, you don't have a standard office per se, but I think that type of hoteling makes a lot of sense especially where you have a lot of workers that are just, free to come and go, work from home, and come, excuse me, sorry, it's like allergies are starting to hit me. At this time of the year. So I think, with the hoteling, for those businesses that have looked at more of a hoteling open concept where you're checking out the rooms, that sort of thing, the work from home, the remote workers, that is, I think also something that along those lines just kind of goes hand in hand. One thing that we're going to look at here, there are obviously a number of legal issues. And one thing we're going to look at is, reimbursements as well as overtime. Now, okay, I put in, this is the first time I wanted to try to do this, and this is why we were delayed like a minute or two, because we were trying to figure out. And I was hoping that we could watch this like 1 minute YouTube video, but I'm not seeing how I can do that. And I hate to hit this number and then have everybody see something super crazy on their screen. So anyway, well, I'm not gonna try to play it. So I'm gonna try to figure this out, because I think that would have been anyway. It was about janitors in space working remotely, and the janitors arguing that they couldn't work remotely. Anyway, it's completely on point. But we have a new system with this On24, and I'm still trying to figure out the kinks with it. So let's move on to the legal stuff, because I know that's super exciting. So let's talk about OSHA. And OSHA, what does OSHA at a base do? And I talk about this if you've heard me on my webinars talk about harassment, and when we just kind of like step back, like what as an employer are you required to do? And one of the base requirements that you as an employer have is that you are required to offer a safe working environment. And it sounds like, oh, that's, super simple concept, Kevin. But when we look at harassment, we look at it like you have to provide a safe working environment, obviously free from harassment. There's other laws around that. But at the end of the day, you have to provide a safe working environment. Well, you're not accepted from that. Just because somebody is working from home. So you still need to provide a safe working environment. Now, the nice thing is that the government has enough, they've given enough guidance on this as work from home has become more ubiquitous. They have given enough guidance to employers so that, does that mean that you need, if you are in Chicago and you have somebody working from home in Hawaii, does that mean you need to send your safety manager out to their house in Hawaii to make sure that their setup is compliant with OSHA rules? It doesn't mean that you have to. No doubt your safety manager is going to want to do that. But you don't have to. So you don't have to take complete responsibility for the work from home, but you still have compliance under OSHA. So what I generally recommend is that if you're going to do a work from home, obviously you should have a policy. I think that just kind of goes without saying. My advice, guidance on this: have a policy. You should have a policy, and the reason why you want to have a policy is so that you're not getting into issues of favoritism. You're not getting into, which leads to potential thoughts of discrimination and harassment. We want to avoid that, right? We want to have an objective framework for determining who can do, like what jobs are qualified, what jobs have we determined as an organization lend themselves to potential work from home arrangements. What is the process for doing that work from home? Assuming it's not just like offered as part of like the job, like, right, you're going to work from home but we want to still, for current employees, we want to have a guideline framework, right? Who's eligible? What are the criteria for eligibility? What jobs are included in the within this eligibility criteria? And then what's the process? What is the application process? Do you have to go to HR? Do you have to go to your manager and then go to HR? Is there a written application? Is it an oral thing? Just have an outline process, and then figure out, and you don't have to put this necessarily in your framework policy, but some sort of mentioning reference to the criteria that's going to be considered, right? So, these are the objective, non-discriminatory type of criteria that we are going to consider when we are deciding who gets to work from home. And that sort of framework, we really want to set that out, because I've seen way too often where employees just start talking about, like, hey, I'd like to work from home, and they get denied, and suddenly they've got some sort of disability or injury or whatever it is, and they're bringing doctor's notes saying that they get to work from home. And then now we enter into an ADA FMLA type of issue that we'll talk about in a minute here. And a lot of times a good policy can mitigate that. Well, part of then the policy, the second part, is that I would recommend that you then have some sort of agreement with these employees. And as part of the agreement, we want to have a compliance, an OSHA compliance aspect to it, because even though we don't have to send our safety managers to the home, in Hawaii or wherever it is, we don't have to send them there to inspect, to make sure that it's entirely OSHA compliant. We do have some responsibility to do that. And honestly, you could still get work comp claims, so you as an employer, want to avoid that risk as well. Anyway, so you want to have as part of your agreement that the employee has taken these steps. Put in the agreement things that they should do, that they should look for, various safety hazards. You can even send them an OSHA pamphlet or something like that. I'm sure the Department of Labor has stuff like that. Or your insurance carriers, on your work comp carriers or property casualty carriers probably have brochures and everything as well, maybe even brochures for at home, and just kind of a checklist of things to look for to make sure. And then obviously as part of the agreement, you're just telling the employee, and then they're going to sign off on it, that they can always come to you if they have any concerns regarding their environment, their work from home environment. Because again, you do have OSHA requirements, but you don't necessarily have to inspect it and all that. If you are made aware that there is a hazard, and again, if it's a hazard like, let's say, for example, there's some sort of gas or mold in the house. Look, and the person's working from home. It's not your responsibility to go and fix that mold problem for somebody's house. Like, how nice would that be, right? Like, I'm working from home, and I've got this mold issue, and also it's my workplace issue. What you would have a responsibility, now you don't have a responsibility to fix it, but I think you would have a responsibility to address it and probably put the kibosh on working from home for the employee, and then just say, well, this isn't going to work. We're not going to let you work in an unsafe environment. You can now come into the office and work here, or maybe we just can't work with you at that point. So there might be issues with the home, maybe mold or something having to do with the layout that you at least should address, but it doesn't mean that you have to fix it and give like a major freebie to an employee that just wants a mold issue fixed, for example, total example off the top of my head, fixed with their house. But again, you do need to provide a safe working environment, and if you cannot do that, and if doing it would be above and beyond what you need to do, what your responsibility is as an employer, then it might be a situation where you just have to put a stop to the at-home work. And most employers don't want to give as a guaranteed right, and this might be part of your policy. I would certainly say something along these lines, that as a guaranteed right, you don't have the absolute right to work from home. That this is a privilege, this is something that's entirely employer discretion, and that the employer has the ability to give and take at their leisure. And again, we want to apply objective, non-discriminatory criteria, so we're not walking into a harassment discrimination type of type of lawsuit. Ergonomics, there are, excuse me, there are no rules, back in the Bush administration, and I'm struggling right now to think if it was the first Bush administration or the second Bush administration. I'm pretty sure, I don't remember. Well, anyway, I think it was the second. The ergonomic regulations were killed. So I think the Clinton administration had written the ergonomic rules. They were about to be implemented, and then I think they were vetoed by Bush 2. If I think about how this plays out, I think that's how it happened. But in any event, there are no requirements that employers provide ergonomic resources. However, we obviously don't want employees getting hurt at work, and we want to lower the risk of work comp claims. So as a result, many employers that, over the years, I think there's increasing sensitivity to ergonomic issues, and that employers are doing, they're doing more like stand-up desks, and they're doing different ergonomic reviews of the workplace to try and, 1, keep employees healthy, keep them, 2, keep them happy, and 3, keep them non-injured. So 1, they can work more, get more work out of them. They don't have to deal with like FMLA and work comp and all that. And then 2, along those lines, avoid work comp claims. We don't want to obviously increase our work comp exposure. So even though ergonomics, there's no requirement under the regulations, as there almost was back in the day, we still, most employers want to at least consider ergonomic concepts, again, for happiness and, if just being Machiavellian about this, to stop people from making work comp claims, not being productive workers. And I'm sure there's, some good civilization benefits to that and everything along the way. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of stuff out there. Again, your insurance carriers probably have stuff on ergonomics. There's a lot of stuff to find out there on this, and you might want to consider, with work from home employees, you might want to consider providing them some tips, and maybe them taking some pictures. You want to make sure that they have a safe chair that you would probably, be expected to purchase for them. Most employers that have these sorts of at-home work arrangement programs or are starting it as a one-off, my experience is that most of them give some sort of budget for getting a proper ergonomic desk and chair, just like you would from, in the office. Excuse me. I should just not do webinars like starting in August, going through November. It's the allergies just always get me. Okay, so injuries. So injuries that we've got here. So again, could somebody make a work comp claim, an injury claim that they were hurt at work? Yes. If the injury, but we have to, when you get that in, obviously you're going to follow your typical work comp or if it's OSHA, workplace injury, you're still going to do the work report, get that done, all the timing. Those are all things that are going to be required. You're going to do that from a risk mitigation management standpoint. But, could somebody from a work from home situation, could they be injured at work, creating liability for you? And the answer is yes. So if you don't remember anything from today, hopefully at least you remember that work comp, can actually happen from home. Then it gets into a potential investigation. Obviously, we're going to, like with any type of work comp, work-related injury, we're going to want to we might have to do a first report, and we're going to pass it on to the carrier on this, and we're going to want to get a narrative. We're going to want to figure out like what happened, where is this all coming from, right? So doing the typical paperwork that hopefully you have internally, and getting all that and finding out what it is. Now, not every type of injury at work is going to be covered likely by work comp, right? As obviously there's going to be some legal, definition on this, like is the person working, and then you're going to factually have to figure out like what was the relation, like how did they get injured? Was it having to do with like sitting at their desk? Was it a wrist injury? Was it a carpal tunnel type thing? Was it like they were so frustrated on a conference call, they lost their sale or whatever, and then they like banged their head into their monitor, thereby injuring themselves? So we are, happens all the time, right? We are going to want to understand what where the injury came from. Now, stepping on a kid's toy that's lying around the house, and if your toddler is playing next to the desk that you have, the work from home desk, and you're on a conference call and you're doing business and everything, and you just happen to step on the transformer line around there and fall and hurt your elbow, is that going to be work comp? I think you're going to have to look at the laws on the state and everything, but I think there's going to be a defense there. Yeah, I think in most states you're likely, most comp rules, most comp policies, laws, I think there's going to be a defense that the hazard that was created, although working from home, in the process of working on like a conference call or something, but the hazard itself was created by a non-work related issue, flipping on a transformer, falling, hurting themselves. Could be it could be that there is coverage for that, but I think at least I would explore what caused it, and I think in that situation you would at least have an argument on a defense, and it might be a perfect defense depending on the state, that the injury was not related to work, that it was because of a hazard in the house that was within the employee's control and that they didn't do anything to prevent it. So anyway, that's the type of example we want to watch out for. But the key is, from a policy standpoint, we want to make sure that we're following all of our typical work comp, first report of injury type of rules, that we are getting all the information that we need on these injuries, and that we're going through our typical protocol, even when the person's working from home. And I think there's potential increased risk. Now, I don't want to say most. So many work comp injuries are created in more of your like blue collar type of work that involves like bending or work that involves bending, lifting type of requirements. I mean, that's your typical work comp fare, right? People get injured lifting, twisting, bending, whatever it is, climbing, something that requires more physicality than me as a lawyer just sitting here at my desk. Although I have contemplated smashing my head into my computer screen, but haven't done it yet. So no work comp injuries for me in that regard. But I think it is, less likely that your white-collar type of service worker working from home is going to get injured. But still could happen. I'm sure it does happen periodically. So we still need to pay attention to it and know to follow typical protocol. Okay. One of the complications, as well as tracking injuries and understanding, their workplace environment, trying to mitigate risk on the injury side, is also tracking employees, not clearly tracking them from a performance management standpoint is a difficulty that I think a lot of, especially if you've got a fairly robust HRIS system that does like logging in and logging off, especially with time, if you've got an integrated time management system in HRIS, and the employee is like logging into it, you can hopefully see when they're working, and you can track how much they're on the computer and the type of work they're doing. And I know a lot of employers have implemented those systems, and I think that's great if you're doing that. So I think technology has increasingly mitigated the problems that employers have been having with tracking time of non-exempt workers. Now, back in the day, I think so many of the workers, 10, 15 years ago were exempt employees because, oh my gosh, it's just so hard to understand like when an employee is working and not working, and do we really trust them when they're hanging out at home? Cynically, probably not. But I think the realities is that we've just gotten past that in many instances. Although I would still be skeptical of employees working from home, but that's just me. But one of the issues where technology has mitigated a lot of the potential damage is on tracking time for non-exempt workers. So non-exempt workers, cynically, we always wonder, are they actually working? But from an overtime standpoint, and that's a performance management standpoint, but from an overtime standpoint, at least we can track their time if they're logging into a system, and we know, like, hey, they're logging in, and we've got the protocol in place where when you're working, you're logging in, you have to log out, so we can track their time just like punches on a clock back in the day, or currently if you're using a physical time punch system. so we can track the non-exempt employees' time. And we need to do that. The Fair Labor Standards Act, the requirements for tracking non-exempt time is still in place for work from home arrangements, whether it's in the office or not. We still need to track employees' time working. We still need to know. Now, could it still be the old-fashioned, like the employee just writes in their time or just emails their time, like Monday I worked from 8 to 5 and took a 30-minute lunch break, from 12 to 12:30, and Tuesday I did. Is that sufficient? Do we have to have a time clock system? No, you don't have to. The Fair Labor Standards Act does not require that you have a time punch system. Is it a good idea? Absolutely. From a management standpoint and a risk management standpoint. Absolutely. Is it required? No. If the employee just writes in on a time card, or they just email you once a week or every day or whatever the hours that they worked, and if they took a lunch break that was paid or unpaid, and they write that all in, that's enough. You just need to keep that record, and that record is required. We, at some point, if we're doing the logging in, I think that's great, especially if the employee has, their own login, their own key that's obviously tracking them. That should be good enough. If they're emailing, then they're affirmatively stating that they worked those hours. And again, there's a trust issue with that if the employee is self-reporting the hours that they're working. But, from a legal standpoint, you've got that legal requirement on the records. But do you also have to pay overtime? Absolutely. If the employee reports that they worked 95 hours that week, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a 40-hour-a-week job, do you have to pay them? Well, I think so, unless you can prove that they didn't work the 90, plus hours that week. I think you would have to pay them. Could you discipline them for working crazy hours without authorization? Yeah, especially if you have a policy that says, overtime, no overtime unless it's approved by a supervisor. I mean, I'm not saying there's no risk in this, but could you fire them for violating that policy if you've been uniform and firing people for working overtime without authorization? I mean, yes, you could fire them for the policy, but I think you still have to pay them unless you've got pretty good proof or can dispute that the employee did not work in that. To that extent, and again, having various time management systems would be helpful there. And I think if you see like the person worked 18 or 19 hours and they logged in that, I mean, hopefully it shows up in a report and somebody mentions it before it gets out of control. But yeah, that would be a situation where you would want to manage the employee, manage them just like you would manage anybody else in the office. But should you pay overtime? Probably. For non-exempt employees, it's so much easier with exempt employees. We don't have to worry about managing and tracking their time. But for non-exempt employees, it's just it definitely adds an extra layer, added layer of difficulty from an HR standpoint and from a risk standpoint that making sure that their employee is being fully paid and that they're reporting their time accurately. So I've got some points in here about, just having an overtime policy, especially like I say, if you don't want employees, there's no expectation that they work overtime, definitely having a policy in place or some sort of, statement. It doesn't have to be in the handbook. It could be in the handbook. It's pretty common. But even just something out there just saying, look, even if it's an email to everybody saying, look, no overtime unless it's authorized. Some sort of policy with the work from home arrangement. Again, if you've got a policy, a work from home policy, these are the sorts of things that could be in that policy regarding the protocol for the employee, that they have to log in, that if they're not logged in, it's assumed that they're not working. So these sorts of things, overtime expectation or prohibition. These are the sorts of things that could definitely be in a policy, so that it's clear up front from the employee that is working from home that there are these expectations and that they're supposed to follow various protocols and rules. And some people, even when they're working from home, they still have FMLA and ADA issues, right? Because just because they're working from home doesn't mean that they're not disabled and that they don't need time off under FMLA. Now, FMLA, the first thing we want to assess from a work-from-home person that might be helpful, and I'm assuming you're a covered employer with 50 or more employees, but from an FMLA perspective, the other requirements, so when we look at FMLA, we look at eligibility, right? So are you an eligible employer that has 50 or more employees? And then 2, is the employee themselves eligible? And to be eligible as an employee, they have to work at least 1,250 hours in the previous 12 months before taking the leave, and they have to work for the company for at least a year. And then also, and this is one that a lot of companies just either don't bother looking at or just waive, but they also have to work. They also have to have at least 50 coworkers within a 75-mile radius. Now, in my earlier example that I totally made up earlier about working in Hawaii, and the office is in Chicago, and let's just say it's only a Chicago office, and they might have 5,000 employees in Chicago, and then this one remote worker in Hawaii. Now, is that employee eligible for FMLA if they're working in Hawaii and all other 5,000 employees are working in Chicago? And the answer is no, they're not going to be eligible because there's not 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius. So I think there is an increased layer of analysis when you're looking at FMLA. Just don't forget that the employee needs to work. There needs to be at least 50 employees within a 75-mile radius from the at-home worker. And if at home being their physical location for their work site, they need to have at least 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius to be eligible. So you might right there make that employee ineligible. But let's just say there are. Let's just say there are 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius, and the employee is otherwise eligible, meets the other criteria. They can take FMLA. So I still want to do the Notice of Rights and Responsibility form. You can ask for the medical certification if it's relating to an injury, and require that the medical certification come back. And again, this is time off work. So if the employee needs time off work, if the employee doesn't need time off work, then why do we care about the FMLA? But if the employee needs time off work for a medical injury or for military leave that's covered by FMLA, or for bonding with a new baby or adopted child, then we definitely want to go down the medical certification route, except in a bonding situation. And we want to apply the FMLA for any of the time that the employee is not working that they were expected to work. And so employees that are working from home still are covered by FMLA. Similarly, employees that are disabled, and your employees that are disabled might be more likely to request as an accommodation to work from home. So again, that's where if the employee requests an accommodation, we want to make sure that we have our policy here in place so we can apply these things neutrally. But even if you just say we don't let anybody work from home, I still think that if an employee has a legitimate disability, they're disabled under federal law, and you have engaged them in a conversation, and their medical provider says along the lines of, "Hey, I think that work from home is an accommodation here." I think you still need to, consider it. And I'm not saying you have to agree to it, but I think it still needs to be part of the conversation, that work from home should be part of the conversation, this interactive process that you have with regard to disabilities. And ultimately, you might say it just doesn't work. Like, given this job, obviously, if it's like a waitress or something like that, how are you going to, serve people if you're working from home? Obviously not going to work. But if it is ultimately reasonable that the person work from home, or if at least could be potentially reasonable, you should at least try it out. I would at least think about it as part of this interactive process, the work from home. And there are a number of situations you can think about you can imagine with employees that have disabilities like anxiety or social anxiety and that sort of thing, where they just, or even they have a sensitivity to your office, whatever, sense or something like that, and they're disabled. You should at least think about, if it's presented to you, work from home. But obviously, ultimately, you get to determine as an employer whether the accommodation is reasonable. In a lot of these situations, it's probably totally unreasonable. It would create an undue hardship, and the person's not, going to be qualified for the job if they're working from home. Expense reimbursement. I bring this up. Most of you probably have policies in place regarding employee expenses and reimbursing them. This isn't something I see a ton of, but it is, I think, something that's more on the radar for work from home arrangements where people are like, hey, I sure would like this for my, desk, right? And the question is, I would like this ergonomic chair to come in, this chair being like a $5,000 chair or something like that. Well, I think, again, this is why we want to have policies in place. We want to have these discussions with employees, but along the lines of how much money are we allocating for the office? What is, what's our policy on this? Or is it going to be like a flat $5,000 that we're allocating for setup of at home? How are we doing this? Are we just going to give the employee $5,000 budget and then just say, go hog wild? Are we going to buy the things, procure the things for the employee instead of, so obviously you're going to have to figure out from an HR standpoint, what's the best way to administer this? And then also with regard to employees' expenses, if the employee is saying, hey, I'd like a better microphone, I want a better phone, and you haven't provided them a phone, they're using their own phone, how are you going to look at this? Well, a lot of states have, and I put it on here, mileage reimbursement, because that's another one that's often discussed because, what is the nature of the job? Is the nature of the job that the person drives around a lot from their home, like a salesperson might, covering a territory, or is the nature of the job that they just work from home? And so then the question is, is it mileage reimbursement if they come to the home office? Like if they drive 100 miles to the home office, is that commuting? Is that working time? Is that mileage reimbursement? These are all things that you want to think about and that you want to draft your employee reimbursement policy around. A lot of states, like here's Minnesota and Illinois on this slide, a lot of states have rules right now, laws that talk about reimbursement of business expenses. So if the employee is, and every state's going to be a little bit different, because I don't think there's for sure no one model employee expense reimbursement policy out there that all states have adopted. As you can see, 2 states have totally different rules right here. But what is a business expense? And if it is a business expense, you don't actually have, under the law, you don't actually have a whole lot of argument to say that you shouldn't reimburse the employee for it. So we definitely want to understand, and by the way, if it's a remote employee in a faraway state like Hawaii, you're going to need to know the business expense, and the employee's asking for a business expense, and they just went out and bought a new monitor because they feel like they needed a bigger monitor. You need to know what Hawaii's law looks like to know if that's a legitimate business expense, or if you can just tell the employee, sorry, that we're not going to let you buy a new monitor. Now, most employees are, clued in enough that they're not going to go do, stupid stuff and try to get reimbursement for it. But we need to understand each state. And again, you might not be super familiar with Hawaii, but because your employee is working in Hawaii, you need to understand wage laws out there. You need to understand termination laws. You need to understand all those state employment HR type of laws in Hawaii, even though your location might be in Chicago. You might have different rules under Illinois, and I think we all know all of us who do business in Illinois know that Illinois is crazy enough to have different rules from most everybody, although California is right in there with them. So, we need to know Hawaii, and so we need to look at that. And we just need to be mindful of those rules. Expenses to consider, is it a business expense? Was it within the agreement that you made with the employee? Is it within the budget that said, how did you communicate with this employee? Again, these are all things that we want to figure out on the front end, so we're not dealing with them on the back end. And so again, this should be part of not this level of detail, but it should be in part of your work from home agreement and or policy that you have with employees, where you're outlining a lot of things that are covered and not covered, and again, protocol for requesting to expense things. What's your exact protocol? Let's talk about privacy. I think one of the biggest risks, and with all the cybersecurity out there and all that these days, and crazy people breaking into hacking companies and stuff, I think one of the risks that needs to be assessed is increased risk to security of your clients' data, your employee data, your business proprietary information. We need to make sure that if we're doing a work from home arrangement, that we've considered all this. That for example, my firm uses a VPN when we're logging in. We need to because we're dealing with confidential, privileged stuff on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, with client information, as a law firm, we have a secured VPN, right? You don't want your work from home employees just using Gmail. You don't want them just using Hotmail. It puts you at way too much risk when they're sending things around. And I'm not saying those are really risky, but you want to be able to control it, right? You might want to even be able to monitor the employee's use. So you might want to be able to monitor their email, right? Because they don't have privacy expectation there. You might want to monitor their email. You might want to monitor their internet usage, even when they're working from home. And so, setting up a VPN, other sorts of secure data, you might need to do that. You might need to have in your policy, this whole WeWork and type of thing. You might want to have in your policy requiring that if an employee is working from home, that they not log in through an unsecured network. So if they're at Starbucks or Caribou, you might need to tell them, like, hey, you don't get to log in through their Wi-Fi. Like, great, yay, free Wi-Fi. But it puts too much security risk for your company. Put that in your policy. We need to be very mindful of this, that we're not, that as businesses, that we're not being negligent, because negligence and then loss of security. If you're negligent and you lose client data, beside the PR hit on this, you could actually get sued for if based under negligence theories, you could be sued for your handling of this. But really, probably the biggest risk is to your reputation and your ability to work with clients and vendors and that sort of thing. So we definitely don't want our work from home employees to be the to have that increased risk and to be the portals that these hackers get to us by, and then release employee data and client data and vendor data and all that sort of thing. I think just this week I got something from a vendor saying that they were hacked, and my credit card was, I swear this happens like multiple times a year now, where I get these sorts of emails, and I'm sure people on this webinar are accustomed to it as well. That you're just. It's just how things are. Businesses are getting hacked all the time, and we don't want to have our work from home employees add to that risk. We need to be very mindful of our cybersecurity risks here, and to do the best we can. Here's some examples of risky behavior that your work from home employees might have. And again, we have a whole cybersecurity team at Thompson Co. So if any of you have questions about cybersecurity risk or need some sort of risk assessment to understand your liabilities and that sort of thing, obviously feel free to reach out to me, and I'll put you in contact with the right people, because cybersecurity is just an increasing area of concern for all businesses, and it definitely impacts HR. Again, more information on personal device use and how that could increase risk. We want to, I think as a general rule, with our work from home employees, we want to provide them with access, secured, encrypted access. We want to make sure that we're providing them with computers so that we can monitor and be the guardians of their security. We want to create policies that require them to access through our company, Outlook or whatever your email that you're using. We want to make sure so that our IT people or our outside vendors, if we don't have internal IT people, are using the best security possible. And again, this all goes above and beyond. There's obviously legal risk here for all businesses that are engaged in using, whether it's credit card data, personal employee information, vendor data, client information. Every company has risks out there, and we want to just make sure that our work-from-home employees are not increasing that risk. Okay, I actually finished on time. I'm really excited about that. So next month we will be doing in 4 weeks. So thank you for your attendance. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me at kmosher, at thompsonco.com or call me at 651-389-5007. Next month we will be talking about LGBTQ issues in the workplace. Again, society is changing, the workplace is changing. There's a lot that we just need to consider from an HR standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, to make sure harassment standpoint, discriminatory standpoint. Obviously, there's just a lot out there. It's good to be refreshed on it. There's been a lot of training on this in the last few years, and so we need, always good to be refreshed on it and to make sure that we're compliant and that we're being in line with the changes in society and the laws. So hopefully you can attend next month. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, thank you for your attendance, and we will talk next month. Thanks.